I'll take the second slot. I'm John Tallon, and I'm going to talk a little bit more on the strategy side, and where I believe research has shown that primarily enterprises, but all organizations are really struggling to get really ready for AI. So I wanted to kind of go through some of the challenges and the opportunities, and also what does an AI strategy look like, and specifically your intelligent data AI strategy, right? So I'm going to go through three different, try and cover three different areas. What does it look like to be AI ready, and what is data readiness, right? And we're going to talk about the concept briefly of data-driven organization, right? I'm going to talk about the four key parts of a data strategy for AI. Some of them Evan have touched on already, so it's more on the foundational side. Most organizations are struggling with those, and then we're going to just talk about how very true data is really a recipe for success. And obviously, clearly, the example you gave there, Caroline, is they're using that data for obviously a huge potential gain. So I wanted to just start off just about one of our customers in Storm Technology. They're in contract manufacturing in the medtech sector, and they collect a lot of data, and I think they admit that they don't use a lot of it, right? But they collect a lot of the data. But one of the challenges they have on the commercial side is they're operating globally, but they operate in a very competitive landscape as well, in the context of when they price contract manufacturing contracts, their prices have to reflect what competitive rate. And they use a lot of data sources for that. And one of the data sources that they use is their input costs. So that would be obviously materials, lighting, heating, etc., and labour. So labour is one of the largest costs. So when they're using that data, they talk to their kind of their team leads. So on the production lines, if you can imagine the production plant or the assembly plants, they have kind of team leads or operational leads there, and they're kind of gathering the data around who needs to be there, the rostering of the machines, and all that kind of good stuff. And when they're doing the pricing, it's the data that's been provided by those individuals that's been brought back, and that's been analysed to see if we can, what the price should be when we're pricing something similar, or when they're pricing something similar. And what they realised was that data was kind of full of biases. It was full of human biases, because a lot of these people who worked on the lines were colleagues of the team, want to make sure that there's somebody around if John needs to go on a toilet break and is coming in late or whatever. And as a result, they found that their pricing was off kilter. So they're either underpricing or overpricing, but not only there was a financial impact to it in terms of winning business, and then the potential margin that they were forecasting wasn't accurate. So what they did was something very simple. They put an app, a small little app that you clock in and clock out at the beginning of the assembly line, and for the sole purposes of capturing who's working on the line and for how long they work on a particular work order. So the result of that, of capturing that data and then using it, right, was that they were able to save about 38% on that particular cost on labour. That's an average, right? So there'll be peaks and troughs on that. But that data now, because there's such high confidence, and the humans have been taken out of the loop, not that there's anything wrong with humans, but that bias has been taken out, is that data now is ready to be brought into AI, and that can be used directly by the sales teams as they're pricing up bids. So it's drawn a really, I think, important comparison around kind of getting AI ready and trying to make that as real time as possible. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, and hopefully we get a bit of that out before the end of the talk. So what does it mean to be data driven? There's a lot of stuff around this. This is not a new topic, and hands up who's heard of being data driven, right? I'm going to assume most people like that. So I think everybody, including ourselves, we kind of think that we're data driven, and we're probably not. We're full of bias, and we're full of all sorts of other aspects to how we make decisions. But at the weekend I was catching up with some of the Microsoft Build events that were on, and a lot of it was on data and AI naturally. And they pulled up two statistics that I thought I'd share with everyone here today, and they're from Gartner. And the first one is that 90% of new enterprise data is unstructured. Ed alluded to some of this as well, right? And then, along with that, 80% of enterprise processes rely on documents, which effectively is the canvas for unstructured data, right? It's not the only form of unstructured data, but it's certainly an impressive canvas. So this compounded with the fact that organizations need to be data-driven, they probably need to also be document-driven, right? So they need to understand how to work with this data. Ed also pointed out about, maybe 20 years ago, looking at relational databases. It's not the thing of the past. So you've got conversations, video, text, WhatsApp even. There's so much data involved in that that's not being harnessed. It's being collected potentially, but it's not being harnessed. So before I'm going to tell you what I think being data-driven is, I just want to go in and just maybe call it what I think it's not, right? It's certainly not collecting or hoarding, as you might call it, massive amounts of data and doing absolutely nothing with it and not using it for any intent. Also, having a graveyard of reports or dashboards that don't get used. They could be Excel spreadsheets. But just if they're not getting used, that is not being data-driven. Making decisions, I think everybody in the room probably has done this, but like we make decisions and then we go and find reasons why that decision was a good one. So we go and try and find the data to back up our things. So I call it Google biasing or bias Googling. So we're trying to justify what we've done by trying to find the data rather than the other way around. Centralizing the data into the hand of the chosen few, that's certainly not being data-driven as an organisation. And then finally, and this is my favourite, because organisations do this, and we hear a lot about organisations and teams within organisations talk about the KPIs, completely disregarding understanding maybe the business needs and customer needs. So effectively, the organisations are potentially alive somewhat, but they're no longer human. They're just driven by KPIs. So that again is not being data-driven. So if I was to kind of say what is data-driven, I would say that it's an organisation that makes better decisions, that creates real value for real people. And I think that's an important part, is real value for real people. Because the decisions of most organisations exist in some shape or form for the needs of people. And how can organisations make better decisions that create value for those people? We've heard about garbage in, garbage out. I think a lot of, at least in my career over my 25 years, I've been working with data a long time, garbage in, garbage out has been a regular expression we would use. But it's now gone up and it's up at the sea level now. So that's where boardrooms are talking about, how are we making decisions in our organisation, and what are we doing about making sure that this doesn't happen. Because the more garbage and the more nonsense that you feed in AI, what you're going to get out of the back of it is just a more confident, nonsensical answer. And we don't want to give our organisations that problem, right? So data quality equals quality AI. Or quality data equals quality AI. So that is what it's referred against. Ed has spoken about this, and we probably all have examples. Anybody who's been using Copilot or anything like that, depending on the information we give it, we get different responses out. Depending on the context that we give it, we get different responses out, and we get better clarity. So it does matter, and organisations are waking up to this, and they're waking up fast. And it's created a paradox around where a lot of the business decision makers and a lot of people who are responsible for the strategy and the direction of the company are in a position of where they're trying to understand how are they going to get ready for this world. They know it's coming at them fast, but the problem and the paradox is that they're not ready for it. And they're not ready for it in the way that they need to be ready for it, because, as Ed said, Moore's law doesn't exist here anymore. It's the speed, acceleration of change, and the acceleration of advancement is happening every 2 to 3 months. And organisations are trying to really hang on to the coattails here. And all the research is showing this as well. So if 66% of executives expect that their industry is going to be transformed, this is from a Gartner report as well from earlier on the year, and also Harvard Business Review quoting this, right? So if if they know that this is happening and it's happening fast, the problem is that the data is not where it needs to be, because they can't manage. It's not that the data clarity is not there, it's that the whole management around it is also not there. 91 say that there's no foundation, or that foundation is what's required to get AI working. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. That's in a couple of seconds. 72% have stopped making stopped making decisions, or at least have slowed down making decisions because there's a lack of trust in the data, and that's back to governance. As also pointed out, that there's a big challenge in that. And also the volumes of data is an issue, because sometimes there's so much data being collected that it's actually not being, it's just impossible for organizations to read through it. Finally, the half of business, or at least half in the survey, suggested, and we see this the whole time, is struggling to integrate data. So there's not a CFO, I think probably alive at the moment, who hasn't, or who effectively would be extremely annoyed if he told them they're going to embark on a data project for the next 12 to 18 months. They're running out of the room. And the reality is that they've been very difficult projects to run. It's not that they're not important, it's just that they're full and fraught with challenges and failures and problems and trying to break down a lot of issues. Because there's a lot of struggles that companies have and they're trying to deal with. And the struggles, I mean, there's 4 main struggles I'm going to talk to you today, and I think everyone will resonate with them. Ed has called out some of them as well, which is great. But we have, we've got silos, we've got effectively organizations that have pockets of data, and teams within that within those organizations own that data. They curate that data. It's not that they can't share it, it's just that it's not a natural thing for them. So organizations are finding it very difficult to make an organizational-wide decision when the data has been siloed and the information has been siloed. So that's a barrier, and that's a challenge that organizations are trying to get over and overcome in order for them to move at pace. The lack of agility. This is probably the main one that organizations are trying to struggle with. Like, it's getting the data to the right place at the right time so they can actually do something useful with it. It's so if you're in a situation where you've got a silo, you've got to go and find information. There's a big time delay in doing that, and then having other timer jobs, and people are collecting massive amounts of data. They've got to run at certain times in the day where they don't disrupt operations. Again, this is affecting the ability to make a decision and to be agile and move and transform quickly, right? So this is a huge, what I say, it's a significant challenge. Quality and trust, again, Ed would have alluded to the quality of the data. I've already talked about the example of one of our customers putting in a process and gaining high trust in that data. But if you don't have a governance in place and think about it at the start, these are the challenges, and this is what organizations are seeing, is that even when they get the data, because it's so fragmented, that they don't really trust it, right? And then finally, security and compliance. There's a lot of worry around if we start now, sharing data across the organisation, collecting it. Am I going to, inadvertently expose a GDPR issue? Am I going to expose some sort of data breach? And what does that look like? So organisations are struggling with that, so therefore they don't actually just don't tackle it head on. So this is a small example, and it's actually from about maybe 6 years ago, I think, with Amazon. And Amazon are a very data-driven company. They're probably the epitome of a data-driven company. And they, as you can imagine, have in their hiring process, they have thousands of candidates that submit for applications on pretty much every post from all over the world. So obviously this is a big problem for them, but obviously recruitment is a big challenge for them, and it's a big opportunity for them. So they decided that they would use all of their data that they already have, and they would feed it into an AI, and the AI would start to make decisions for them on the basis of its existing data. And there was nothing wrong with the data per se. The data was all around, the type of applicants, the type of people who got the job, the skills that they had, and all that kind of. And I was able to identify some stuff. But the problem was with the data is that most of the candidates most of the people who were employed by Amazon were actually males. So it actually completely, the data started, and the AI started to completely bias and rule out all female candidates straight away. So the only CVs that were being surfaced up or male CVs who met the criteria. So the AI was doing its job, but the data that was being given was, well, it was accurate. It wasn't void of any bias, and that was an extremely important part. Now, obviously, it was a very embarrassing event for Amazon, and they quickly removed it, and then they had to kind of go back to basics. That's a very example of where even not having your data ready or not understanding where the biases and risks come means that you've got a big problem in how you deploy that. Now, most organizations won't have the resources and the ability to do what Amazon will do, but there are ways that organizations can solve this. So I'm going to talk about these strategic areas, right? So this is kind of a representation of an organization that has a good AI and intelligent AI strategy. This is AI generated, by the way, so using where possible. But what's happening is the raw data comes in from wherever that is. That could be from sales data, it could be from messages, emails, you name it, sensors, and then it goes through. And it goes through this process here, and then out the end comes like insight, right? Okay, this is very simple, but what's going on in here is the important ingredients for most of our big data and intelligent data strategy. And I'm going to cover each one of those individually, just so that you get a bit of a feel of what they mean and exactly how to employ them. So in terms of unified data, so again that kind of helps with the breaking down of the silos. We'll talk a little bit about that. The quality, the agile, and security, and it's kind of with these four core components that your data that will form the basis of your intelligent data AI strategy. So the this diagram is almost self-explanatory, right? This is kind of really what unifying your data is all about. But there's a lot more that goes on over here, and a lot more in these DBs are not just databases. They can be Excel files, they can be managed by different teams. So you've got to figure out a way of how can I start to unify that data. So the first thing that the first thing you've got to do is collect it, know about it. So if you don't know it exists, or if the organization doesn't know it exists, then you're obviously going to struggle. You're not going to be able to kind of use that data for other things. So it's about going through that process of unifying the data and talking to the various different teams within an organization, so that you can understand what your data sets have been used, because these are the critical assets of the organization. It brings a single source of the truth, right? So for example, like if marketing and sales and operational data are all the same, very much like the example I gave you earlier on, then that means a lot more decisions get made very, very quickly, right? And then to have trust in the data is another thing we'll talk about in a second. So the second part is actually that governance and quality, because once data starts going through the pipeline of when you're collecting it and then when you're going to be storing it wherever the destination is, you've got a lot of processing to do on that data. Obviously, this illustrates maybe fixing some typos and things, but there's a lot more than that. If your data coming in is from documents and it's unstructured, then you need to find a way to classify that data potentially. So you could have different types of emails, maybe customer complaints coming in, you want to gather that data, you might want to run that through an AI or through some sort of process to classify it, and then catalogue that and put that in the right place for where you can use it at a later place. So your governance becomes an important part. The other part of governance is relevance, right? So data coming in, you need to know what's our intent, downstream intent. Well, I want to make sure that as part of my governance process that I rule out or maybe archive what I feel is not relevant or relevant information as part of what the most important parts of the government's data, the company's data assets are. So this is an extremely important exercise, and this is probably the most difficult exercise for organizations to adopt, because this is a lot of thinking and a lot of planning. And as I mentioned earlier on, when CFOs see this part going up, to kind of, they're ready to run you out the door. But extremely important, because this feeds everything else. So it also helps with your compliance, and also helping with data storage and data growth as you're collecting all of your data. So we go back through to the agility and accessibility. Again, these are not all sequential steps, but at least the first one I think is you need to have your platform there, and you need to have some sort of platform you can pipe into. So I've got about 5 minutes, right? But the key to really making data AI ready to get it as real time as possible. Now that's not possible in every instance. Do month ends and month end, and we don't have all the data out until whatever is the data. But how can we, across all of our data capturing scenarios, or wherever those in the process, how can we get that data brought into the same place where we can start to act on it as close to real time as possible? One challenge that businesses have with that is that depending on where their data is, they've got to ship it from on-prem up into the cloud, or they've got from this part of the cloud up to that part of the cloud, maybe some other cloud or some other system on some SaaS system into here. So we can keep everything in close proximity, which is not necessarily always possible, but we can get more real-time data processing and data transactions going on, so that you can get to the point where you can make the decisions at a much faster pace. And organizations that can do this can actually react and act very, very fast. And we've all probably seen that even now with the likes of having co-pilots in work, and those who use that can actually get a lot of data very, very quickly, or even the minutes of a meeting very, very quickly. So you can summarize and you can send out very, very quickly, whatever the actions are, and make sure that the loops get closed. And finally, on the third or the fourth point is security compliance. It's obviously, probably not the most glamorous area of this, but it is the biggest risk, and certainly for C-levels and boards, compliance and security is a big issue. There's a personal compatibility in some of those as well. But you want to avoid data breach. You want to avoid a compliance issue at all costs. If that's possible, there's a huge brand problems, a huge brand impact if you've got a data breach, and that kind of we've seen with M&S there recently, and how that's affecting their sales. Right? But the key to this is to try and bake in security at the very start. A lot of modern cloud platforms are giving this. So again, back to what Ed said, like the pace of which this landscape is changing, even at the platform level, is night and day. Even that conference that I referenced earlier on, that I was watching from last week from Microsoft, the amount of change that they're putting into their platforms, they're not the only ones. It's mind-boggling, and it's impossible to keep up. But what it's trying to do is trying to solve these problems as quick as possible, and as easy as possible, to make organizations ready for that trend of AI. So it's those four key areas that if you can, with your organizations, whatever, if they're commercial, if they're educational, if they're governmental, if you can help out with those, then you're going to do a good service to your organization. The payoff of kind of reveal these all. The payoff, obviously, we've probably pointed out, but anyway, is get that real-time sense in the organisation, and have that culture of real time, that we don't delay decisions, we trust our data. The competitive advantage for organisations in doing that, and I think as these things make up, it's going to bite itself. Those organisations that don't do it just won't be able to react fast enough. So if a customer brings somebody looking for a proposal or looking for a quote, and it takes them 4 days to get it, and it takes somebody else half an hour because they're augmenting the process, or they've got quicker access to data, they're probably going to start running the business faster, right? And then obviously the optimization and talent liberalization. Like, we can't put in these tools, and organizations can't put in these tools without first of all training and look at the culture of the organization and training how to use these tools and this data as it comes available. So there's a huge access there. By freeing up our staff, and by freeing up our teams to be able to work easier and better and faster, and not have to go over the donkey work, getting at the data, getting at the sense that we're liberating them and allowing them to do so in a much more valuable way. So I'm going to close out with a recap of the takeaways, right? So understanding, and I hope everybody here is getting my message, that AI readiness is data readiness, essentially. Be very deliberate on your data strategy. There's 4 key areas I've mentioned there. And clarity through data is a great recipe for success. So if you do anything, my advice would be do something good for the data that you operate in your organisation next week. Start now, because the best time, obviously, to work on making your data better is yesterday. The next best time is today. So the next best time after that is probably ASAP. Being data driven is about making better decisions, create real value for people. I talked about that. And then I think that's really a story worth telling. So with that, I'm going to say thank you.